as Green Team, in your role as Green Team leader, will help you kick off a year of climate activism within your synagogue community and help your Green Team establish a 7-year plan to accelerate decarbonization. I want to mention how this program fits in with activism around decarbonization. So we can go to the next slide. Oh, that's me. Okay, next slide, please. Next slide. So this was a program we put on in March. And look at this graph. It shows the gap between where we are now and where we need to be. Big, big drop in carbon. That program was emphasizing the paradigm shift needed, that a ramping up of community organizing is necessary to reach climate goals in the next years. Well, we're well past the early adoption stage, but the gap between these two dots is daunting. So tonight, it's just 7 months later, we are in a new era in which these serious incentives, which is going to be the feature of tonight's program, the content of tonight's program, these new incentives will greatly accelerate our work. And you can see that in the next slide. You can see that in the next slide. The projected difference in this graph, if you could go back again just for a moment so people can see that, that if we did what we were going to do without these incentives, we'd get to some drop. This is federal here, national, and with this climate bill, it'll be a much more significant drop. So thank you, Thea. I will come back later in the program to explain how JCAN's upcoming cycle of 3 decarbonization workshops will help you and your Green Team organize to decarbonize in your community. I want to acknowledge that political activism has gotten us to this point. And political activism is especially needed right now. I hope that you and your Green Team are currently constructively engaged in political work. We must make sure to raise awareness among climate concerned voters by this next election day. And I will note our involvement with Dayenu at the end of the presentations. But right now, I want to thank the amazing leadership team at JCAN, Janet Green, and especially Thea Ibral, who worked so hard behind the scenes to put this all together. Tonight, we are grateful for an awesome array of professional talent from members of JCAN's Tech Council, led by Rachel White. Thank you so much, Rachel, for moderating this panel. We are grateful that all the panelists have come forward to give of their time and expertise to mount this very special program tonight. And I will remind everyone, we have a number of people from around the country. All the speakers here are Massachusetts based, but the content we are talking about is national in scope. I'm going to turn over the program right now. You can go to the next screen, to the esteemed Rabbi Henry Zoob, my teacher, for a short devar. Thank you so much, Rabbi Zoob.
Okay, thank you, Fred. Am I on?
You are.
Okay, I'll begin then, thanks. According to tradition, there are 613 mitzvot, or commandments in the Torah. One of them enjoins us to say a blessing after we have eaten. This mitzvah is derived from the 8th chapter of Deuteronomy, verse 10, where we read, "V'ahalta v'savata v'erakta et Adonai Elohecha al haaretz asher natan lach." When you have eaten and you are satiated, praise Adonai your God for the good land he has given you. This makes perfect sense. The land is a gift from God, and therefore, after enjoying the gifts of the land, one should thank God by reciting the Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after the meal. Strangely enough, there is no biblical commandment for thanking God for the gifts of the earth before we eat. The rabbis were, of course, aware of this oversight and sought to address it. And so they established a plethora of berachot, of benedictions, that are to be said prior to eating. They vary greatly according to what is to be eaten. Thus, over an apple or a pear, one says a blessing thanking Borei Pri Ha'etz, the creator of the fruit of the tree. But over karpas, or parsley that we eat at the Seder, one gives thanks to Borei Peri Ha'adamah, the creator of the fruit of the earth. And if one has a varied meal of meats and vegetables, you should use the all-purpose blessing, thanking God, Shehakol Niyeh Bidvaro, by whose word everything came into being. Bread and wine, of course, have their own special blessings. Whenever one is having bread, regardless of what else is in the meal, one thanks Hamotzi Lechem min ha'aretz, the one who brings forth bread from the earth. Indeed, lechem, bread, takes precedence over every other food, since it is the most important dietary staple. Over wine, which is also thought of as very special, one thanks Borei Pri Hagafen, the creator of the fruit of the vine. All these many blessings are a way that Judaism expresses how appreciative we should be of God for blessing us with so many varied and wonderful foods. Lacking a biblical proof text, the rabbis wanted to provide a clear and effective rationale as to why one should say a blessing before one eats. So Rabbi Hanina Bar Papa in the Talmud, Barachot 35b, said, anyone who derives benefit from this world without a blessing, it is as if he stole from God and the community of Israel. Rabbi Hanina wanted us to recite blessings like the motzi before eating because he understood it as a way of acknowledging God's ownership of the earth and all the wonderful food that comes from the earth. If we don't, he maintained, we are robbers. I would add that when we really understand that God's earth is the source of our sustenance, we should be moved to do everything in our power to preserve the divine bounty that comes from the earth. JCAN has rightly declared that the greatest threat to God's earth and our basic food supply is the warming of the atmosphere by human negligence, which has wreaked havoc with so much of the natural world, including our food, resulting in less and poorer quality of fish in the seas and the devastating loss of crops on earth. I sincerely believe that by reciting a blessing before we eat anything with true kavanah, that is, with true intention, that we are thanking God for our earthly food that can really help us make the connection between the food that we eat every day and the necessity of caring for God's earth. While it may be one small step for Jewry, I would encourage every JCAN member to take upon themselves the mitzvah of reciting a blessing such as the motzi before everything we eat. And after you have adopted that mitzvah for your own, get your family and friends to do the same. If it brings to our consciousness the need to conserve God's gifts of food to us and all humanity by working to slow down the rising temperatures on earth and in the oceans, then it is definitely a mitzvah worth repeating again and again throughout our lives. Amen.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zoob, for that. And thank you, Fred. Thank you, panelists. It's wonderful to be with you here tonight. As you all know, my name is Rachel White, and I'm thrilled to be the moderator of this panel tonight. I just want to give you a quick rundown of the main program so you know what to expect. So we're going to have 5 presentations, very brief presentations tonight. We've broken it into 3 sections. We're going to start with information on solar incentives. We'll move then to energy efficiency and mostly heat pump incentives. And finally, we'll turn to EVs. After each one of those sections, we'll take a couple of questions. So I would encourage all of you who are here as you're listening to the presenters to please put your questions in the chat. I've got it up on another area of my screen so that I can be, and Thea can help me as well, sort of pulling questions from that. Again, after each section, we'll do a quick, a couple of questions. And then at the end of the program, after Fred comes back and gives you some information about upcoming JCAN workshops, then I will go into a more extended Q&A and discussion section with all of the panelists together. So without further ado, we'll move into our first section, which, as I said, is going to focus on solar PV incentives. And here tonight, we have 2 folks who many of you may know, Isaac Baker, who is the co-CEO and founder of Resonant Energy, a solar developer based in Dorchester. And also with us tonight is Haskell Werlin, who's the business development director at Solar Design Associates. And Haskell has been doing this work for a very long time. Maybe in the 70s, Haskell, I can't quite remember. But in any way, I'll turn it over. I believe we're going to start with Isaac, and then we'll switch over to Haskell. Take it away.
Sounds great. Let's see, I'm just going to share my screen. Good evening, and it's a pleasure to be here with you all. My name is Isaac Baker, and I, as mentioned, co-founder of Resonant Energy. Just pulling this up. Can someone confirm this is all visible here?
I can see it. Looks great.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to be brief. We're diving into policy that was just passed by the federal government. That's 400 pages long, and we're going to do it in just a few minutes here. So I'm going to do my best to move quickly, but please add questions to the chat as you go, and we can try and circle back on them. By way of quick introduction, as mentioned, Resonant Energy is a Boston-based solar development company serving mission-driven organizations, primarily nonprofits and affordable housing in Massachusetts and New York. Just as a few of our claims to fame, we've done now 1/3 of all faith-based solar installations in Massachusetts we are responsible for, including many synagogues. And then we are also running multiple campaigns with statewide organizations like LISC and MACDC, and which over the last few years have brought solar to over 88 new developments of affordable housing operated by 12 nonprofit housing developers across the state. And that number is ticking up as we speak. Just to share a few quick examples, since it's always helpful to get inspired by your peers, I wanted to share a few projects of some synagogues we have particularly worked with in Massachusetts, all of whom have taken different creative pathways to making their solar happen. So this is Temple Re'im in Newton, a project that I worked on for about 2 years myself. That involved a combination of a capital campaign and a loan, and is now powering a significant part of the operations of the building. Temple Beth David up here on the right, that we were able to help them secure a loan so that they could have a pathway to owning their panels, to offsetting their electricity needs. Tifereth Israel down in New Bedford, they went with a no-cost option, and they had an underutilized field next to their parking lot, a little more common when you get outside the city. This ground-mounted facility is offsetting 100% of the energy needs of their fairly large building. That also, they have a anchor tenant in the building that is a girls' middle school in the area. So this solar array is providing all of the energy needs for the middle school and the synagogue itself. And then Temple Amuna, they rented their parking lot, and we came up with a financing program where about half of these panels are meeting the electricity needs of the building, fully meeting the energy needs of the building, and the other half are being sold on a discounted subscription basis to low-income households in the greater Boston area. With these bottom two, there was zero upfront cost to the organizations to participate, and with these top two, through a combination of loans and capital campaigns, they were able to have ownership economics and get an even better outcome. So just to show you, there's a lot of pathways and different creative projects you can do with solar, but and as you can see, it can be on a parking lot, in the ground, or on a roof, as some of the many common choices we've seen folks taking as they think creatively about how to make solar work for their organization. So that's some quick background, and I want to pivot now to the Inflation Reduction Act, often now known as fondly as IRA, or with the IRA. And we're going to dive into some of the details. First, we can thank our friend Joe for finally coming around this summer and allowing sweeping climate legislation to make its way through the Senate. And here is what he finally unleashed in August of this year. So this policy takes a solar tax credit that had been set to sunset, was currently this year on track to drop to 22% next year, is at 26% this year. And we did away with all of that sunsetting, which is not what's happening for the solar industry anymore. We have gotten a 10-year extension on the 30% tax credit. So all of that sunsetting is now out the window and has been pushed out a decade. And we have 10 years of 30% tax credit value. And it's important to note that that tax credit value as a baseline was added for both residential and commercial projects. They have different policies. The residential tax credit is governed by Section 25D, commercial by Section 48. Those details don't matter. All you really need to know is it's a 30% tax credit for solar. And that means if you spend $1,000 on solar, you are going to get $300 back when you go to file your taxes. And now here we are on talking about how houses of worship can benefit from this. And they also thought about that and put in a new policy for nonprofits and tax-exempt institutions of any kind, which is called direct pay, which means for the first time, instead of a nonprofit that does not pay any federal taxes being unable to benefit from tax credits, you can now benefit through direct pay, which means the federal government will literally cut you a check. So if you spend $1,000 on solar equipment as a nonprofit, you can get a $300 check back that following tax year with some paperwork and process in between. So that is the most significant and sweeping change associated with this policy, aside from the overall increase in the value. And that direct pay is going to dramatically change the landscape for how nonprofits finance and benefit from clean energy going forward. In addition, this has increased the savings and the overall value proposition of doing solar for both ownership and no-cost options. And at a high level, well, we'll get to it later, but just to say, no matter how your solar gets financed, this higher tax credit value is going to make solar more valuable. In addition, we have what are called EJ, or environmental justice adders. So the relatively progressive Congress not only got us up to 30% as a tax credit value, but tossed on some environmental justice adders on top of that that can take you past 30% up to 40, 50, or even 60% tax credit value, which is enormous. So this is the headline and a very exciting process where the federal government is picking up the tab for what we are hoping to do with solar. As far as some of the direct pay details, qualifying tax-exempt entities will be able to receive this direct cash payment in full view of the investment tax credit, or the in full lieu of the investment tax credit, or ITC. As a reminder, there are some complications, but just to get into a little bit of the detail, if you're a nonprofit and you want to get this direct pay, if you own your building outright and you buy the system, that's great. Let's say that you are a slightly larger organization and you maybe own some housing, or you've got some other stuff going on and you own it in a subsidiary LLC to your nonprofit organization. That's fine too, we believe, so long as it is wholly owned by your nonprofit and there are no other stakeholders to that real estate ownership. So nonprofit tax-exempt entities, including municipalities, great new pathway with direct pay. A quick caveat to the direct pay, which is also in line with some of the policy objectives of the administration, is domestic content. The administration wants to be incentivizing all of us to be buying equipment that is made in America, but they have wisely noted that we just spent the last few decades offshoring all of our manufacturing, and we now need to onshore it by bringing all of that back, and that's going to take a little while. So in 2023, if you want to use direct pay, you do not need to qualify for you do not need to have any domestic content, and you can get 100% of this direct pay. In 2024, you can get 90%, and so on. And in 2025, 85%, and then you drop off a cliff. And by 2026, they really are saying you have to have domestic content if you want to use this direct pay. And the domestic content also has an increasing percentages by year of the amount of domestic content that you need. For a solar project, it's pretty simple. You're just going to need your panels to be made in the US, which will likely get you to about half of your total project cost. So that is how that will work. But if you're doing solar in the next year or two, you don't need to worry about that. And you can get direct pay whether or not your panels are domestically available noting that that might be difficult. So first, we will celebrate direct pay as something that we have been waiting for a long time and is a big deal. In addition, somewhat confusingly, you can also get a 10% boost at any point of these years if you qualify for the domestic content adder. Meaning in 2023, if you do domestic content, you can get a 40% tax credit, 30 as a baseline plus 10% for domestic content. You'll likely lose some of this value by buying the more premium and more expensive locally made panels. So we think that this is potentially a financial wash, but a nice thing to do if you believe in American manufacturing and want to support that. Environmentally, as I mentioned, there are some environmental justice adders. There's 3 of them, and I'm not going to get into all of them, but there is a location-based adder that says, we as the federal government, we want to see projects be located in low-income areas. So if your house of worship or your household or any project is placed in an environmental justice census tract, otherwise known as the New Market Tax Credit census tract, but it means if you're in a low-income area, you can get another 10%. So that 30% jumps up to 40%. And if it was a domestic, if you use domestically made panels and it's in an environmental justice community, now you're at a 50% tax credit as they are stacking together. So that is a possible outcome that you could see for a faith-based institution in Massachusetts located in East Boston or in Chelsea or Brockton or other or Lawrence or other parts of our state here locally that are in low-income neighborhoods. And as a caveat, that affordable housing allocation is only relevant for 2023 and 2024. And it is on a first come, first served basis with an application process that is as yet not released and is going to be somewhat complicated, which Resonant is going to be working with our clients and partners to help people qualify. So moving right along, we will just say that after, in my experience, having worked in this industry for 10 years, this is a totally groundbreaking level of policy change, both on the direct pay, the environmental justice fronts. This is what political action looks like when we fight and we finally prevail and get some good progressive policy to work with. In terms of taking action, for commercial projects, as I said, the Treasury Department has until February of 2023 to finalize the guidelines for how you get anything above a 30% tax credit. It's likely that you'll need to have a signed contract and an interconnection application with your utility approved in order to get that, but we don't know. And the advice we're giving to all of our clients is start taking action now so you can be at the front of the line for some of these incentives as they get rolled out in 2023 and beyond. If you are a homeowner or advising homeowners locally, you're just going to get that 30% tax credit, and that is available starting today. So folks can go out and get started on the residential front. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but just as I wanted to quickly mention, in case folks don't know, solar can be financed with an ownership pathway where you can take advantage of that tax credit, or you can do a no-cost pathway where a third-party financer fully covers the cost and covers ongoing maintenance and insurance, and then they sell you the power each month at a significant discount relative to current utility rates. Utility rates are spiking because of the war in Ukraine and other factors across the country. Solar is a great way to shield your organization from the massive cost increases. In Massachusetts, we're likely to see up to a 300% increase in electricity costs this winter alone. So there's a very significant financial benefit alongside the very clear environmental imperative of moving over to clean energy. Lastly, we'll just share that we have been working with our partners to come up with a new loan option that works specially for nonprofits. So if you do want to own a solar array on your building, we have a 5% interest 10-year loan with a small closing fee that is being made available by a foundation partner out of California that we are working with to help make solar even easier so you don't have to work through a conventional bank and go through a whole lot of headache around that. So that was the absolute lightning version of this. I have done a 1 hour plus version of this policy. So I hope this was very helpful in giving you the high level, and I am available for any questions as we go. And I will pass to my colleague Haskell Werland from Solar Design Associates to talk through some of the implementation.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Isaac, for that presentation. I don't think you could have crammed it any more into that time frame, but there's still more to learn from the final regulations that the IRS will issue on the IRA. So we're not completely there yet, but it's a whole new world since that passed. I think we had a twofer this year. We never expected a second climate bill in the Commonwealth. And since about 2/3 of the audience are from Massachusetts, I should mention the climate bill that passed in August included two key solar provisions, one of which allows a cap of 25 kilowatts for exemption from net metering. So if you have a house that you're building or a house that you're putting solar on, you are limited until this summer to 10 kilowatts. And if you wanted to put in a heat pump and you wanted to put in an electric car charger, that would be pretty impossible at 10 kilowatts. But at a cap of 25 kilowatts AC, you can do a net zero house. And that really changes the game for new construction, for deep energy retrofits, and for shoals. A 25 kilowatt exemption from the net metering cap is a big deal. And that was passed after about 5 years of lobbying. So I send out kudos to all of my colleagues that worked at the State House day in and day out trying to get this bill passed. Also, there was a single parcel rule that limited one parcel, one facility, one solar installation. And that limited condo associations, that limited college campuses, hospital campuses, where you'd have multiple buildings on a single parcel, and you could only put one array on one building. So now, if you happen to be living in a condo association, then you might find it useful to look into having multiple rooftops covered with solar on the same parcel. So it's a big change from the Commonwealth standpoint, as well as at the federal level. That being said, due to a lot of factors like supply chain concerns, you should get started early because it takes at least 6 months to a year to plan and install a system. And today we're looking at getting projects started in the spring of next year, just because the backlog of projects are holding us up, as well as the interconnection application takes several months with the utility. And then once you get that done, then you have to order equipment. So if you're planning to take advantage of the very lucrative tax credits that Isaac referred to, now is the time to get started. You want to get involved with a design company, whether it's an installer, or electrical contractor, or a design firm such as ours, Solar Design Associates, where you can actually plan the whole system and get everything in line to take advantage of the 2023 and 2024 window. As you saw, domestic content will become required. Domestic panels right now are hard to come by and they're expensive. Hopefully there'll be more in production by 2026. But in the meantime, you have a great window of opportunity, and you also have the accelerated depreciation, which is going to decline. So right now you can get 100% in the first year of depreciation. So if you are a for-profit, then it is worth looking into that. So there are many factors that you want to consider. The best thing to do is to get started soon. I worked on the Temple of Muna project with Resonant, and it took them several years with multiple companies to interview before they settled on Resonant and got the design and the construction done a year ago, which was really a great achievement of everybody getting on the same page, from the Temple Finance Committee to the board, and as well as the town of Lexington to approve it, and then Eversource to approve the interconnection. So it was quite complicated. And then the financing to get the low-income community solar was another layer. So this is a very complex project, even with 200 or 300 kilowatt systems. It takes a lot of thought. So I encourage people to really get started soon. That's the key to my message tonight. Hug Sameach.
Thank you, Haskell, very much. And thank you, Isaac, as well, for informing us about the generous incentives, and Haskell also for, I'll emphasize your main message, which is to get started now. These projects are complex. We're gonna, in the interest of time and the fact that we don't have any questions yet in the chat, I will remind folks to please post any questions in the chat. We're gonna move right along to the next section on heat pump incentives. And I would like to just quickly introduce Eric Grunebaum, who will be speaking with you tonight about Eric he started screen sharing. So
Sorry about
Eric,
that.
go ahead. Why don't you?
You don't need. I don't need much introduction.
I don't need to. I don't need to introduce you. You can, but he will be followed by his colleague Chris Lewis. So I'll just turn it over to Eric and to Chris to give us some insight into the incentives in the IRA for heat pumps. Go ahead.
Thank you, Rachel. Sorry for jumping in so quickly.
No, that's good. Jump away. Let's keep it going.
Move along quickly. Thank you, everybody, the panelists and people who are here. We'll try to do a quick. Heat pumps are complicated, as you may know. We're going to try to do a quick intro in under 10 minutes. Myself and Chris from Greener U. So buildings, a huge amount of our energy consumption, which represents a lot of our emissions. And what are we going to do about it? As Bill McKibben put it, in a world on fire, stop burning things. And we are burning things most of us in our basements or sometimes on our roofs or next to our buildings, but we need to stop doing that. So how do we do that? Well, heat pumps. And we're not going to go into the technology tonight, but think of your refrigerator or your air conditioner as a kind of heat pump, and a heat pump basically will heat and cool. So what are we getting with the IRA, as Isaac referred to it? It's incredible. After a decade of the investment tax credit accelerating solar, for the first time it applies to heat pumps. And this is amazing. Unfortunately, it's capped at $2,000 a year, but still, that's a real chunk of change. Basically represents about 30% for the first $6,600. It starts in 2023, so be careful about jumping too soon. And it also extends through 2031, which is great. There's some real, having that certainty for a decade makes a huge difference. It does in solar, of course, and it will in heat pumps as well. There's also some credit for upgrading your panel, which you may in fact need to do in order to do heat pumps. It's gonna draw more electricity, and as most of you probably know, if we're going to decarbonize everything, we need to electrify everything. And as the grid gets cleaner, then everything all that electricity that's powering your EVs or your heat pumps will get cleaner as well. On the investment tax credit, there's no income limit, which is good. There are also, and we're not going to go into this tonight because it's really complicated, but there are a bunch of subsidies for low and moderate income folks. And there are more for market rate folks coming in the in the Inflation Reduction Act. So there's quite a bit more. It will probably take 6 months to a year for a lot of that to unfold through the state programs. So what do you do? Well, first of all, you should look up what your state incentives are. There's a website called Desire. I think people usually call it that. And I will put all these links in the chat right after I finish talking. Look for your state's incentives on that link. And first off, if you're powering your house with a heat pump, you should get an energy audit and do that weatherization work, because that way you will not oversize your system. And in Massachusetts, it's going to be required. It is required. There may in fact be additional incentives for that. And you should take advantage of those as well. For those in Massachusetts, the incentives are quite generous already. So that, and we think that will be additive with the federal incentives, the investment tax credit. So you can do both. And in Massachusetts, it's $10,000 for a whole house system. And for a partial house system, it's $1,250 per ton. Up to $10,000. And if you want to get a sense of how many tons are required for your house, it's about 500 square feet of your house per ton. So 1,500 square foot house, 3 tons. And there's also more in Massachusetts for low and moderate income households. It's quite an amazing program. We're lucky to have Mass Save. So if you're looking for a contractor, Local is good, reputable, experienced, check Angie's list, now known as Angie Next Door, talk to friends, colleagues, neighbors. The state efficiency programs and aligned nonprofits will often have lists of contractors. And if you're in Massachusetts, there's something called the Mass Save Heat Pump Installer Network. The installers are required to be trained. This is sort of a work in progress, but I hear that it's getting better and stronger as time goes on. Also, a really great resource through Green Energy Consumers Alliance, which is an amazing nonprofit organization. There is a company called Abode Energy Management, and they will do consultations and they will help you compare quotes. It's actually free in Connecticut. I know in some towns in Massachusetts, it may be free, but it's pretty low cost, a couple $100 maybe, and well worth it for the thousands you might save. Get some references, talk to people who've already done it with the contractor and then go for it. What are we expecting? I think there's clearly going to be an acceleration of installation, a lot more contractors getting into it. There are definitely some bumps with supply chain and people being very busy now. So you should start soon if you're thinking about it. Schedule your installation for 2023 though, so that you get the $2,000 investment tax credit. Odds are if you start researching it now, you're not going to install it till 2023 anyway. One note, be careful about removing your existing equipment. In Massachusetts, you're allowed to keep it as a backup for extreme weather, and it may, in fact, be efficient to use it for 2 or 3 weeks every winter when it's very cold out. But you will still get heat from your heat pump, but it may be cost effective to keep your old boiler, as much as I would like you to see you remove it. Last but not least, Green Energy Consumers Alliance and Abode, which I mentioned before, are doing some events next Tuesday and Thursday. I'll put the links in the chat again. And they will go into a much deeper dive. And with that, I think I'm handing it off to my colleague at Greener U, Chris Lewis, who is VP of Engineering there. Chris.
All right. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
So I just had a couple very brief slides on heat pumps and commercial applications. So for larger buildings, houses of worship being a good example. So the 30% investment tax credit that we heard discussed earlier, fortunately does apply to ground source heat pumps as well as a clean technology. This also does include the direct pay feature that Isaac was discussing. So this is big because it lets organizations that are nonprofits actually receive those tax benefits and take direct advantage of them by getting those paychecks or those checks that Isaac mentioned earlier from the government. So a lot of the guidance is still pending on that from the IRS, but that's definitely a big development in terms of the recent legislation. Also in Massachusetts, and apologies to those out of the state who are joining us, but there are very strong incentives here with the most recent state energy efficiency plan from 2022 to 24 included a big boost to heat pump incentives, really trying to get people to move from fossil fuel heating systems to heat pumps. And you heard Eric mention the figure $1,250 per ton for heat pump installations. The commercial Mass Save program is offering anywhere from $2,500 to $4,500 per ton, with that highest number coming for ground source heat pumps. So a really high efficient type of system. It is a large capital investment for commercial buildings to make that switch, can be a bit more complex, but definitely a good way to reduce emissions. And the incentives are very strong. We do know of one house of worship in the area that's looking at about $350,000 in incentives to support their conversion from old gas-fired heating equipment to air source heat pumps in their facility. So what to do? We always like to say efficiency first. So anything you can do to just generally improve the energy efficiency of the building, reduce its consumption, reduce the heating load prior to thinking about going ahead and making the switch over to heat pumps, because as Eric mentioned, they'll operate more efficiently in a tighter, more well-insulated building. And then we also really like to encourage planning ahead, planning for failure. So the situation we want to avoid is you've got a gas boiler or something that's old, and it goes out on you, it fails. And the only thing you can really do to get heat back onto the building that winter is to put a new boiler in, replace it in a fairly quick manner. So planning ahead, making sure you understand what the options are for applying a heat pump type system to your building, because it can be a little bit complicated and take a bit of forethought. And then also kind of understanding what that budget looks like, especially with the new incentives and new tax credits. But getting your financing strategy in place, lined up so that you can take action at the right time and not really getting caught in a situation where you have to replace a fossil fuel-based system in kind. So definitely recommend working with a project provider that can help you plan this out, look at the financing options, help you through the design and engineering portions of that planning, and also deliver the project. And for incentives in Massachusetts, definitely visit MassSave, which Eric already mentioned, and then the same DSIRE website can point you to other programs in your area. And with that, I think I'll see if we've got time for Q&A, or if you want to add anything into the chat, we'll probably have some time to address them later. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Chris. I did want to call everyone's attention, if folks have not been monitoring the chat, that Eric just posted a bunch of heat pump links. Thank you so much. That's really very helpful. I also wanted to just quickly call attention to a question that Diane Sokol posted a little bit ago that I thought was very useful, that Isaac addressed, which is just how the IRS defines the difference between residential and commercial. And just, Isaac noted that residential means a system that's purchased by a homeowner, typically on a single family property or condo. That commercial, it refers to third-party finance systems on residential properties, or obviously systems installed and owned by nonprofit, municipal, or commercial buildings. So thank you for that. Just wanted to call attention to that. I did have one quick clarifying question. I'm trying to see if there's anything else that's come in. On the well, and you probably don't, maybe you don't know the answer to this yet, but on the direct pay, do you have any sense yet, or have you seen enough of the regs to see how, what the sort of the time frame is after which institutions would get that check from the government? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? Do you have any sense of that, after the installation is complete?
The short answer is I don't know. I suspect Isaac might have an opinion on this also, but it could be that it takes a tax year to go by, which that'd be sort of the worst case. It's like you're filing your taxes in April and you don't get a refund. So if you did the work, a year before, that could be a long wait. Isaac, if you're there still, I wonder if you have an opinion on direct pay.
Isaac might have had to drop off, but I'm just looking to see. Well, if anybody has thoughts on that, I saw Fred nodding his head, please.
Well, I'll just jump in by saying that I saw Isaac's presentation last week, one of the hour-long presentations that he referred to. And yes, that was covered. And yes, it's just as you were surmising, Eric, that even for a nonprofit, or maybe especially for it's the same for a nonprofit as anyone else, you have to submit a return to the IRS and then wait whatever length of time. So they made a point, Resident made a point that if you happen to be finishing your project and able to file for it before the end of the tax year, you'll get your credit sooner. If you happen to be finishing your project at the beginning of a tax year, then you're gonna have a longer wait. So, but at this point, can anybody engineer that well? I doubt that. So, but that's what he said, as I remember.
Thank you, Fred. Eric, when you said that you should wait until 2023 to take advantage of the new $2,000 incentive for heat pumps, can you just clarify, is that when the system is actually installed or when the contract is signed? And I have a client in this situation, so I'm actually personally curious about this question.
I asked that question to Abode today, actually, and their hypothesis is, and I don't think we have, a clear signal yet. The way he described it is there's a lot of fogginess on the Inflation Reduction Act, but that his hypothesis was it will be upon installation. It's not like solar where you have to turn it on and then you can get the investment tax credit. He thinks it's going to be installation, but that's a little bit of a guess. I think
I figured you may not have the answer to that
yeah,
either,
I don't
but
think
there's
I'm not
all
sure.
sorts of nuances, right?
I'm not sure it's, yeah, it's all being worked out now, basically.
Let me just see if there are any other, okay, all right, I'm gonna pick one other question from Jen Leibovich. Any thoughts? I think this would probably maybe be for you, Chris, on the average cost of a heat pump for, I mean, for a synagogue. Obviously, synagogue buildings vary tremendously, right? In their, well, maybe they don't vary tremendously, but they do vary. So I don't know if you can even really address that question.
Yeah, it's tough to address specifically, just because there can be a lot of variations in what type of system is there, what the existing system is, what the aging condition of the building is. But we do, if sort of a fairly comprehensive, all new HVAC systems throughout the facility are required. In our area, I think around $30 to $40 per square foot is a quick rule of thumb to kind of get you an order of magnitude. So it does end up being, does end up being pretty a pretty high price tag, but you know, again, it's worth digging into specifics to see what your options are.
I would just add to that if you have aging equipment that's failing, that is your ideal time to do it, because you're going to you have no choice but to replace, you know, significant capital equipment. But if you're not prepared for that moment, then you end up doing a 1-for-1. You know, many folks will end up doing a 1-for-1 replacement. And now you've got 20 more years of a gas appliance in your building. So you really want to try to get ahead of it. And, you know, if your equipment is, you know, 10, 15 years in, or, you know, a few years from its expected lifetime, that's when you want to start looking at it and seeing what your next equipment is going to be like if you want to decarbonize, and be ready for that.
All right, thank you, Chris and Eric. I think we're going to move on. I did notice at least one other question in the chat from Ellen Stone. Ellen will return to that. If you're able to stay on at the end, we'll return to other questions for the extended Q&A when we get there. But we're going to switch gears now to electric vehicles, and I would like to introduce David Lowe. Who has said in an email to me yesterday that he's no expert, but he owns a plug-in hybrid, and his next car will almost certainly be an all-electric vehicle. And he's done a lot of research on the new incentives for electric vehicles. And so, David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Continue. Did I do this right? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Can you see my slides? Whoops.
So I can hear you and I can see you, but we cannot see your, there we go.
Okay, good. I hadn't finished.
Yep, we can see your slides now.
Very good, thank you. Yes, I do want to emphasize I'm not an expert. I'm going to try to help you become the expert that I am not. That doesn't make sense, but there are a lot of details, but there are a couple of headlines. And I actually was going to start with a slide above this, but it's not going back. So here we go. Just the title slide. So I turned it around a little bit to emphasize the headlines, but I will also cover why should we drive EVs? What are the benefits? And some of the complexities that you've seen in other presentations exist here too. And then what's new with the incentives, and a little bit of guidance on how to buy an EV. So the headlines are for the federal program. Now I'm curious, do you see my little banner here too? Probably not, with all of your faces. Probably not. Okay. So the really big news, I think, for equity is that there's a credit for used cars. That's new, $4,000 credit for used cars. In the past, you had to buy a new car to get any benefit. And my wife asked the question, well, how is somebody going to buy an Audi? Well, that's another factor. It's down the bottom. They targeted this a little bit so that luxury cars are excluded. So the existing tax credit that we have had for the past few years is being extended for another 10 years, just like other programs that we've talked about this evening. So $7,500 in federal tax credit for new cars. There is also a Massachusetts state rebate if you live in Massachusetts. Now that I listed it as $2,500. There's a little bit of a caveat. It's $2,500 for an all-electric car. It's $1,500 for a plug-in hybrid. And I have a slide that spells that out. We'll come back to that. There used to be a cap per manufacturer. So, for example, we'll see later the list of cars that are eligible right now in 2022 for the rest of the year. And Prius isn't on there. No Toyotas are on there, I don't think. And certainly the car that's featured in my background, the Tesla, is not available because these cars have sold, these brands have sold more than 200,000 cars each. And so they're off the table. That restriction will go away. So they will come back into the program starting January 1st, 2023. To my wife's point, why can't I buy the Audi or a Tesla? Well, there are also caps on income. So if you earn more than $300,000, this is the bottom of the slide. If you're buying a used car, the limits are $75,000 in income filing single. There's an intermediate step if you're filing separately, but if you are filing jointly, it's $150,000. So you can still get a $4,000 credit up to those income levels. For a new car, for an electric car, it's $150,000, $225,000, I think, if you're filing separately, and $300,000 if you're filing jointly. So you might be priced out of buying the Audi, or the Audi may not be on the list because there are caps for the price of the car, $80,000 for an SUV, $55,000 for a sedan. You certainly can get a large range of cars, and there'll be more coming onto the market next year when that is in place. Actually, someone told me that this was a question I had that I didn't get answered, but a random stranger I was talking to this about said that the income gap has already kicked in. That is an issue right now. So starting in 2024, this is also a big one. We were just discussing the delay to get the federal tax credit when you file your taxes the following year. But starting in 2024, the rebate, well, the tax credit will become a rebate. It'll be at point of sale. So it will be somewhat instant. I'm sure there's still paperwork, but the distributor will be absorbing some of that process and will help you with it. So it'll be much easier to get the credit. Oh, I'm pressing the wrong button to advance. Here we go. So this is just a continuation about the state program. As I've said already, $1,500 for a hybrid, $2,500 for purchased or leased. That's actually new. We leased a car. Our first electric hybrid, plug-in hybrid, was a Chevy Volt. Since it was a lease, we got the $2,500. We did not get the federal $7,500. The leasing company got that. But the state still, actually that is the same. I'm sorry, that is unchanged. If you lease a car, you still get the $1,500 or $2,500 state benefit, but I don't think you get the federal benefit because that goes to the owner of the car, which is the leasing company, the financing company. This is a busy slide, and I'm sorry, but I wanted to circle back to why electric for anybody who's questioning that. At the global level, I don't know if I can highlight, yeah. So transportation nationwide is responsible for about 27% of greenhouse gas emissions. And it's the largest sector. I know there was a slide earlier about 40 for the housing sector. There's probably a way to explain that, but I'm, according to this source, which was the DOE, I think, this is the data I came up with. It's significant no matter what, but the other key point is that worldwide, transportation sector is growing faster than any other sector. I'm not sure if that's true in the US as well, but you can imagine how in developing countries, a lot of people are buying vehicles who didn't before. And the potential for, the potential for reducing it is, there's a lot there because we haven't really cracked the nut of the transportation sector. So there's a lot of carbon in the system, if you think about that, that can be squeezed out. And the example of that is, drive around, how many Teslas and other electrics do you find? Now, I saw a cluster, I almost included a picture of, a cluster of a Prius and 3 Teslas in front of me at a light. I was really on Beacon Street in going from Brookline to Newton. I was really surprised, but that's rare. Usually, it's maybe 10% of cars in a progressive area that are already electric. So there's a lot to be squeezed out. And locally, for your own interest, why should you buy an electric? Well, I did say the global part, I didn't say the pollution part. And the pollution part, of course, is an environmental justice concern. But for you, it's cheaper to own and operate and maintain an electric. It has fewer moving parts. It really doesn't require a whole lot of maintenance compared to an internal combustion engine. There's strong subsidies, of course. So the unaffordable will now be affordable. And that, the example of that is the used car incentive. There's the pollution comment. And it is faster than a camel. And it sprints like a cheetah, which is fun, but we don't encourage using more energy, but sometimes it is useful to actually get out of a dangerous situation. So, there are some small challenges, minor bumps. Like a cheetah, EVs need to recharge, obviously, and that leads to range anxiety. It's a reason that we bought a plug-in hybrid instead of an all-electric. If I want to go skiing or to visit my mother in a different state in the past, I don't want to, at this point, have to stop, find a charging station, see if there's an available plug, and then wait half an hour to recharge enough to move on to the next one. A lot of people do, and they manage just fine, but that was our threshold, and I think that's a very common concern. Luckily, and that's why we have incentives to get people to overcome those hesitations for either the financial or the, I'm not sure, it's new, it's scary. The charging infrastructure will be changing because the IRA also, we're calling it IRA, also provides a 30% credit up to $1,000 for non-commercial installations of chargers. And commercially, it's only 6%, but it's up to $100,000 total credit per unit. So, and it used to be there, but only at $30,000 maximum. So the incentives are there to quickly or largely grow the infrastructure for charging, and that'll overcome people's hesitation. And the other caveat to that is it has to be installed in low-income communities or non-urban areas. And so it will get the charging out to where it's needed, not just where we live. And I mentioned already that it will become a point of sale credit, but at this point it's the federal tax credit, and so with everything else that we've heard this evening, it's extended out for 10 years. Details, I've probably gone over too much time already, but this kind of summarizes in a messy way one chart that talked about the no manufacturer cap, number of cars sold, no luxury cars. It's targeted per income. The tax credit will become instant in 2024. There are some complexities that we won't talk about, where the minerals come from for the batteries, and that it be assembled in the US. And you can see how this is a tapered incentive or disincentive like the other programs had been, which is good. It gives people time to, or manufacturers time to adjust to it. And it's a jobs component. you know, it's not something we have to worry about because there are organizations out there that will help to guide us through the purchase. I'll come to that in my last slide. And it's, you know, again, it provides local jobs. These are the cars that are available until the end of the year. I see the Audi is on there. Maybe that person was wrong about it pricing out. Does anyone know if the income limits are there? Whoops. Well, okay. You can buy a car before the end of the year. The cars we were looking at are not on this list, but there are many, many coming starting January 1st. So that would be the option. These are the some of the websites and links that I found that are useful. I'll put them in the chat, and I'll share them with Thea, and she can send them out to folks. That's it. Clearly, I'm not an expert.
Thank you, David. And I think, Thea, can you just, I believe we're going to try to make the slides available to attendees, folks who registered tonight. Is that right?
Yeah, the whole thing is being recorded, and everything in the chat is going to be available. And
great.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. I am just, so we're right at 8 o'clock, and I know some folks may have to drop off early. So I think, let me just take a quick, I think what we'll do is, Fred, why don't I turn it back over to you to talk about upcoming programs, JCAN programs, and then we can bring the speakers, the presenters on for a whole group for Q&A.
Terrific. Okay, thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you very much, speakers. And usually when we talk about other programs, it's as though we're saying, okay, there was this one, and then there'll be a totally separate one. These are all related. They're all connected. And as a matter of fact, they are here to help channel your efforts to put all the above to work. So there are a cycle of 3 workshops. They are standalone, each of them, but they work together. And Thea, you can go ahead. I'm going to just mention each of the 3 of them. And we have dates now for 2 of the 3 coming up in November. Run a decarbonizers program for your congregants. This would be a program that you or your green team would organize, and we show you how to do it. And it is a marvelous, marvelous way to accelerate decarbonization amongst your congregants' households. It's fun, it's cool, it's super, super effective. It gets stuff done, gets people decarbonizing, gets people past their preconceptions, their obstacles. Why? Because it uses peers. It's a peer-to-peer program. You can organize it, you can do it, it can be fun. Do it in this year. Okay, so that one's coming up November, and you will see the publicity. And the one after that in December is benchmarking. And if you don't mind, show of hands, anybody here has anybody here already attended a benchmarking webinar? Can you push a button to raise your hand? We'll take a look at that in a minute. If you haven't, what it is your base case. You calculate your carbon footprint of the synagogue or the facility so that then you can go from there and lower it over time. But it helps you determine where the carbon is, which, whether you're heating or you're cooling or you're lighting, et cetera, which ones contribute more and which ones contribute less to your carbon footprint, and how much they each cost. So it's a training in a spreadsheet, and it's really a very, very effective tool. And the next one, Thea, and so if you could just raise your hand, if anybody's listening out there, raise your hand if you or your synagogue thinks you've already done that. If you haven't, that's fine too. There are 3 hands raised. That's good. Okay, and the third one is, we don't have the date yet, but it'll be in January. And the third one puts all this together. And we used to call this setting climate goals for your synagogue, meaning take as long as you want, as long as it needs. No longer. We're going to shift that to establish a 7-year climate plan. So it's not just the goals, but it's the plan, and chart it out over the next 7 years at the latest to drive your carbon footprint from what it is now down to 0 or as close as possible to it. It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible. Folks that are here now should feel empowered. And at least, however empowered you felt coming into tonight, you should feel 30% more empowered. All right, next slide. So that's the cycle of 3. 1, 2, 3. Sign up for them all, or even better, get different people from your green team assigned to each of those. Okay, and the next slide. I want to mention that one more show of hands. Is anybody working through Dayenu? Anybody here working through Dayenu? They're working hard to make sure that high climate concerned Jewish voters in key states cast their ballots this fall. Your synagogue may be working on this, or you may be working on them through a Dayenu circle. There's any number of paths, and we hope to still have a JCAN Dayenu phonathon, canvassing phonathon. It is nonpartisan. It is nonpartisan. They arrange for phone numbers, and we just dial the number and just follow a script. It is so easy, it's so basic, so straightforward, and so necessary. And they determine which parts of the country you dial into, depending on the time and what they determine is needed. It might be Pennsylvania, it might be Georgia, we don't know. Okay, and so did I see a number of hands go up for that? Is the number 3 for this question also, perhaps? Good. All right, so we will watch the publicity. It will be coming up, and I will stop talking now and open it up, send it back to Rachel for Q&A. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Fred. Thea, if you can spotlight all the panelists so that we can all be on screen, that would be great. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to call attention to the fact that there's been an interesting discussion going on in the chat about heat pumps for houses of worship, and how you sort of address the swings in occupancy, which are fairly typical for houses of worship. And Chris, I was wondering, I saw you were chiming in to respond to Diane's question, and Andrew Webster posted as well, but maybe you could bring that to the whole group, just share your thoughts about that, how to think about the swings in occupancy in designing a heat pumps and a system for a house of worship.
Sure, yeah. Diane rightly pointed out that particularly for air source heat pumps, they do have to work a bit harder to sort of catch up. So a typical energy saving strategy would be to set back temperatures, so a lower heating temperature set point in unoccupied times, or a higher cooling temperature. So with heat pumps, that can be less effective because they have to work harder to make up for that difference when returning to the occupied mode. So how to deal with this in a large space with a potentially large load that gets used with a lot of people for maybe only a day or two in a week. And my recommendation would be, at least make sure you're not using fresh air ventilation at times that the space is not occupied. So that's a huge component of the energy load that you don't need to use when no one's there. And then if it's going to be, more than a few days, or at least up to a few days, I would say at least experiment with using some modest setbacks so that you can save energy when the space isn't being used, and then allow for more time for the system to recover before that occupied period starts again.
Thanks so much, Chris. And thank you, Thea, who's just sent me a direct message and reminded me of Ellen Stone's question, which I would have forgotten about. So because the chat is now long. So Thea, thank you very much. And Chris, you or Eric, you may have responded to this. This is also a question about heat pumps. Ellen is wondering about whether heat pump systems lose efficiency over, sort of a two-part question, whether they lose efficiency over time is one question. And then I think the second question is obvious. Are newer systems more efficient than older ones? Yes, the answer is yes to that. But that I'll let Eric or Chris address that first question and how to think about that.
I think you can take that, Chris, on the degradation. But the only thing I would mention is if your heat pump system is, you know, more than 2 or 3 years old, then there probably is a significant difference in efficiency, because the last couple of years have shown pretty big increases. But in terms of degradation, so you know, at some point you may need to replace it, but that would be, you know, factoring in the newer incentives and whether it even makes sense. But Chris, on degradation, why don't you take that?
Yeah, I think there will naturally be a little bit of that. You know, maintenance and cleaning of the systems is important, and that's true for any system, you know, not just heat pumps. So, you know, the efficiency may start to slip a little, but I definitely would say yes, the you know, a newer system is going to offer more efficiency. If you have existing heat pumps, then that also has the advantage that the space and the system overall is kind of designed and set up to accept that. So actually replacing equipment may be less of an ordeal than if you're going from something totally different, like steam heating or something like that. So I see a hand up as well.
Oh, I can't see hands. I must have a different access than you do, since I'm not sharing my screen.
Am I invited to talk now?
Yeah, Myron.
Yeah, I'm a building science building scientist in New Orleans, and often, and for over almost 2 decades, been recommending ductless mini split heat pumps in New Orleans. And in New Orleans, I'm sure to a much less extent, I mean, greater extent in New Orleans than in Boston, but we have big humidity problems. And one of the things that most people don't realize is that efficiency isn't really the primary reason why we have high energy bills. It's because we don't have adequate dehumidification. And a large number of small units can dehumidify better than a small number of large units. And in my synagogue for Rosh Hashanah, they had all the small units on, and so none of them cycled properly. And so the humidity rose, and we were uncomfortable, although we had adequate capacity. And so it's a little bit more complicated than you think. You really want the small units on as opposed to multiple units so that the drying occurs. And when the drying occurs, your body will accommodate the rest of the cooling on its own if the air is dry enough.
Thank you, Myron. I would just say it's important to have the systems designed. And I think that's what your comments are, you know, and your experience in your synagogue is calling attention to. And of course, our climate up here is different than yours down in New Orleans, but it's still really important to have a well-designed system that then the people in the building know how to operate it effectively. So did you have a question, or was that just because I wanted to get, if you had a question, I'd be happy to present it bring it to the panelists.
I wanted to assert, I'm sorry, I didn't get to hear the panelists. I'm an Orthodox Jew and I couldn't join until literally 5 minutes ago because Yontif just ended for me. But I wanted to point out that the price of a kilowatt hour is a wholesale price is largely correlated to its carbon footprint. So if you're only measuring your carbon footprint by the number of kilowatt hours, you're missing a bigger and more important feature, namely when the kilowatt hour is sold. And a good rate design will encourage you to buy electricity when the wholesale price is lower. And that's far more valuable in most cases than more efficient equipment. And I can explain that in great depth. And I invite you to let me explain that at some future meeting.
Thank you, Myron. Does anybody on the panel have a comment or about the wholesale electricity prices and how that affects the decisions that we should be making as homeowners and as members of houses of worship? Maybe we'll defer to Myron for a future program. Thank you. I did want to bring a question on EVs, and I'm sorry, it looks like both Haskell and Isaac had to jump off. So I'm just looking to, I don't see currently any questions about solar, but a question, I think this is mostly for you, David, is a question from Janet Green about the sort of the domestic content requirement, I guess, or US made. And that could be a sticking point in terms of the use of the uptake of the incentives. I was wondering if you could just share your thoughts about what to expect on that, if you have any, what to expect on that front.
I avoided that on purpose because it's a complexity that I think the consumer probably doesn't need to burrow into too much. I was neglectful, and I'm remiss that I didn't sort of shout out Green Energy Consumer Alliance, specifically their website. If you just Google Drive Green, it's a great program. And they will, they can dig into the weeds on that and explain it, or they will guide you as to which cars are eligible and which are not. So yeah, I don't know if it's going to be a problem or not. But I'm sort of comforted by the fact that there are people who are digging into the weeds, and those are the folks. It may be a little bit less useful for folks that don't live in Massachusetts or Rhode Island, because that's their focal area, and they're very up on the incentives, and they have buying programs and information programs for these two states. But it's still useful to peruse through and see what they're saying about the different vehicles. And the policies tend to be fairly, even the state programs tend to be set well to meeting the goals that I think are common elsewhere as well. As for that goal, I just don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Well, things are still evolving so quickly that it's hard. We're not going to have, nobody expects all of you to have all of the answers to the question, but I will. Eric did kindly offer to try to address any solar questions if there are any. So while we're waiting for other things to come into the chat, I'll just ask if you have thoughts, Eric, about the domestic content requirements for the solar incentives and how that may affect folks' ability to take advantage of them. 2026 it goes to. It just seemed like it's good, and Haskell's point was like, take advantage of this in 2023 and 2024, right? Before this starts to rapidly ramp up. Thoughts about that?
I mean, I think we all want to see more domestic manufacturing. So I think we support the goal. And actually the tariffs on Chinese content in panels probably have accelerated some domestic manufacturing. However, I think, and I'm sort of going on instinct here a little bit, but I think that the acceleration of solar installation due to the 30% investment tax credit and all the other additional credits for environmental justice communities are going to ramp up demand so much that it's going to outpace the ability of whatever manufacturing we do have in this country. On the plus side, I think we will see more manufacturing opening.
Yeah.
If you want to take advantage, though, I do think first movers are going to absorb a lot of that credit. So, and that goes. I think you want to be in line sooner. So, start thinking about it now. And besides which, we need to start reducing carbon now too. So, I don't think waiting. This has been the case for a long time in solar and in efficiency too, which is that things are good now and they tend to get worse. I mean, this is an interesting bump in that things got a lot better in August, especially in Massachusetts, where we had 2 bills passing within, I think, 10 days. It was kind of amazing. One of them never expected, the federal bill. But generally speaking, the sooner you move on energy efficiency and clean energy, the better the incentives are. So I'd say don't wait around much longer and try to move forward if you have potential projects.
I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask just for just to make sure, is that those domestic requirements do not apply to heat pumps, correct? It's just for the EVs and for solar.
I think that's right. Is that correct, right, Chris? I don't think I've heard any domestic content for heat pumps.
I haven't heard about any domestic content requirements for heat pumps as yet.
And I know this wasn't on the agenda for tonight, but have there been changes to other aspects of the investment tax credit for energy efficiency that might be useful for folks on this program to know about?
So as far as other energy efficiency types of,
yeah, or just have the incentives gotten more generous, or is really the big news the inclusion, the biggest news or the only news, the inclusion of heat pumps?
So I think I know a lot of the focus on that in the IRA was on the residential end of things. So there are expected to be some increases in heat pumps and other efficiency programs in general that will sort of trickle down through the states. So a lot of that I think is yet to be hashed out as well. But speaking again, just for Massachusetts where we're based, there are some pretty good, they just released the 2022 to 24 plan, which had some pretty good, has good incentives overall for efficiency. Heat pumps were sort of the highlight to that, but yeah, I would definitely just recommend checking with what the current and active state and local programs are through your utility providers and seeing what's available.
I just pulled up a list of one of the on the investment tax credit from the IRA, and it will include. I mentioned $600 for an electric panel if it's installed in conjunction with a heat pump. There's also $1,200 for weatherization of tax credit, $150 for an energy audit, $600 for energy properties other than HP/HPWH. Maybe Chris, you can translate
heat
that.
Heat pump water heater. Heat
right.
pumps and heat pump water heaters.
HPWH. Thank you, Rachel. So there definitely are some other tax credits for other energy conservation measures, and for one of the other federal provisions, which really applies mostly to low and moderate income households, there's quite a bit more as well. And those are direct rebates through the federal program for heat pump clothes dryer, induction stoves, rewiring required to do heat pump, and weatherization for low income housing, low and moderate income folks. So there's quite a bit more coming as well, but the tax credit is already known and starting, and there's a couple of other credits, and then more will be coming in 2023 that'll flow through the states, and that may take 6 to 9 months or more even for the policies to be defined within each state.
Yeah, so still a lot to learn. Before I go to a next question for the panelists, I have a question for folks who are still with us. I'm curious to know if folks see the new incentives accelerating their synagogues decarbonization plans, and if so, how. You're welcome to put that in the chat to share with the group. We'd love to hear how you think the new incentives are going to change things for you. I'd like to bring forward a question from Stephanie. And Stephanie, I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce your last name. Is it Joff or Joffe? Asks about, go ahead. Joffe, sorry. Thank you. Which is, what can you do if your synagogue has an old roof that you can't afford to replace now and no other open space? I don't know, since we've lost Isaac and Haskell, if Eric, I see you nodding, if you could speak to how you might roll that into financing for a solar project.
It can be rolled into financing sometimes. If the project has decent economics, like your electricity rate is high and you have a good size. Usually, the larger scale, the more the cheaper per watt an installation is going to be. Actually, the congregation that I was on the board of, we had to replace a roof, and it actually made a good. We had a single donor pay for half of it, which you know is it. And only because I was cheeky enough to ask around and find somebody who I thought would do it, and I, you know, she did. So, you know, I wouldn't, you know, underplay that option also, which is somebody who's climate concerned and has resources might step up. I know a parochial school in Cambridge where I live, and a friend of mine had offered to split the cost of a roof with, I think, 3 other parishioners there. So, you know, maybe if it's a big roof, maybe it's a group of people. And there's the possibility of rolling it into financing. And so spreading it out over a large number of years.
Thanks, Eric. If it helps to have one other case study, my congregation Temple Beth Avodah is installing solar, and we were not expecting, we did not plan to do a capital campaign but we need to replace our roof. So I could speak directly to this. And we surprisingly had a large donor step up. So there's maybe more interest in roof replacements for solar. I mean, obviously when we, you know, it's the donation, and it's a matching donation. So, but I was, I guess, surprised. We were all sort of surprised to see that there was interest in in replacing a roof for solar. David is going to chime in here too.
Just a creative thought. You know, somebody may not want to step up and donate outright, but somebody might. You could offer 10 years worth of dues or something like that to front pay, you know, just to stretch it out.
Yeah.
I have one more comment on that, which is we were at the Association of Physical Plant Administrators, a really fun group of people a few weeks ago, and these are for the people who are running the big plants at universities and colleges, and one of the schools is replacing its entire central steam heating plant. This would be Swarthmore, and they had never had a donor step up and fund a physical plant capital need before, and somebody stepped up and is donating $7 million to create this really showcase central pumping station, basically for, I think it's 900 wells for their ground source heat pump system. They're calling it Geo Exchange. But so I think times have changed, and I think there are people who are willing to fund things to see their organizations that they care about move forward. So, you know, don't underplay that possibility. It can happen.
Well, I did not expect this discussion to go in this direction, but I'm really glad that it did. So we are almost at time. I saw there was, Fred, you might have to chime in here, and you posted something or maybe you did.
There was a reason. There was a reason for it.
Okay, if you could just chime in and say, someone said we should expect a very large increase in electric rates,
right.
Question mark. So
who was that? And I thought I heard 300%. Was that Isaac or you, Eric?
That was Isaac, but I have heard that number before, which
300%.
is kind of unfathomable. I'm not sure I really understand. I mean, triple, that's just crazy.
Okay.
But I have heard that.
So I had heard 40%, which is also crazy, but 300 is, okay, crazy or not, it's huge. It's a huge number. And I just want to put it out there that there will be a lot of hurt. So not to end the program on a down note, but I am thinking about that it might be appropriate for JCAN to hold a program in a couple of months. Midwinter will be too late to do anything about it, but maybe December. I've reached out to Mass Interfaith Power and Light. JALSA would also be a partner for this. Anyway, it's a consideration. If anybody wants to talk to me about that, I'd love to hear. I think everything that we talk about here in the direction of reducing carbon, reducing energy load can help, but no matter what, a huge increase in electric rates and gas rates and oil rates is going to be a lot of hurt for a lot of people. Whether you're well off or not, it's going to be budget busting this winter. If it doesn't get cold, then never mind. Otherwise, you know, It's going to be tough. Europe is far ahead of us. They know they've known what's been coming. It's been front of mind. They've been working on it for 7 months. We have not here. There's not been good messaging on this. Anyway, I'm thinking it might be appropriate for JCAN. Anybody wants to talk to me about it, I'll put my email in the message in the chat. And this has been a great program. I thank everybody on behalf of JCAN for all your participation, all the people who came out to attend, and the panelists, and Rachel especially for doing the tough job of shepherding it all. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.